So, our next speaker is Ray Gallant. He is the Vice President of Sales Support for Volvo Construction Equipment, and he's part of the Volvo group of companies. Ray is a forest engineer with over 25 years experience working in product development, product planning, and sales and marketing with a variety of equipment products. Ray has a Bachelor of Science from Dalhousie University, a Bachelor of Science in Forest Engineering from UNB, and a Master of Science in Management from Boston University. Ray, this I think is an old slide or old information because I believe you've already completed your DBA. And it was expected. Yes, right. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. And then Ray's wife and two children are Canadian. Ray has lived in the province of New Brunswick in Ontario. He's also lived in Brussels, Belgium, North Carolina, and Ray currently lives in Pennsylvania. So he's joining us. He's made a big trip this morning to come in and visit with us. So I'm not sure. Trip. A virtual trip, exactly. Last February, so only 9 months ago, Ray joined us and talked about the future of heavy equipment, from excavator simulators, electric excavators, all the way to the feasibility of remotely operating heavy equipment. At that time, all of these concepts seemed really remote and far in the future, but as we're all too aware, within a month of our discussion, everything changed. So we thought it'd be really interesting to see how feasible these items are now, and Ray, maybe further our discussion from last February. So Ray, welcome back, and we're very excited to hear from you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay, well, thanks for having me back. First of all, it's always a pleasure to speak to a group like this of young leaders. And what I wanted to do is, as well as giving kind of a sequel or a follow-up to what we talked about just 9 short months ago, I wanted to talk a little bit about leadership and kind of, you know, it's a young leaders group. So my perspectives on leadership as an old guy. So kind of give a little bit of perspective as to what I see coming in the future and some of the exciting changes that groups like yours are going to be facing in your careers going forward. So with that, we'll just jump right into it. As Christina said, here's my biography. The only change to this in the last 9 months is the lack of travel allowed me to finish my dissertation in defense of my doctorate, and I was awarded that in July of this year. So I think that finishes my educational journey at 4 degrees. So, but I can attest and I can strongly recommend that remain a lifelong learner. It's there's nothing more valuable in your career than continuing to learn, continuing to push forward in a variety of different topics. So I would, from personal experience, I would say that higher education, the more education you get, the better you can be in your career. We talked about last February about some of the drivers that were coming forward. So I didn't want to have just a marketing presentation where I talked about the products that we were putting out. I wanted to talk about to you, but more about what was driving that product and that thinking and that development. And I talked about 4 basic trends that we saw going forward in terms of Volvo. And one was the rapid urbanization. So people moving from a country rural setting and producing a lot of their own food or small farms that produced for a few families in a community towards more of an urban setting where all the raw materials are harvested or mined, processed in a rural setting, and then sent to consumers in an urban setting. And that trend is taking place all over the world. Where in 1950, we had about 30% of the population was city dwellers, urban dwellers, and about 70 was rural dwellers. And now it's completely reversed. So 70% of our population is dwelling in cities, but all our raw materials and processing of those raw materials happens by the other 30%. So that was one big trend driving changes going forward. The second trend, and you're hearing more and more about it, is sustainability. And here we talk about environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability and economic sustainability. So businesses have to be able to, and organizations have to be able to be doing something that's putting a long-term viability into their business or their organization in order to survive. So you can't do something just for the sake of a good environmental impact if you can't survive by doing that. The third one, and you've seen it all over this year because of COVID, is political instability or political changes, where our political institutions and leaders are in some ways getting more and more involved in the regulations, the politics, and the drive going forward, especially in terms of the urbanization and sustainability. So where they're trying to control that change and that shift to make it good for society. And the fourth trend is, of course, technology. As we see new technologies develop, they have new abilities and we have new features that we can bring forward to take care of some of these needs developing out of the other trends that we see going forward, as well as the technology trend itself, which drives a change in behavior just because of new technologies coming along. So what we did at Volvo is take those trends and basically define them in three different technology areas that we looked at as being the way forward and what we had to concentrate on to build products that would be acceptable and would promote the future vision that we want for building a better world, basically. So the first one was connectivity. So how do you connect machines to head offices, connect machines to each other, and make sure that not only are the machines working efficiently and the systems working efficiently, but the entire site and multiple sites are working well together. So how do you connect and use that information that's coming out of that? We're very good at collecting data, collecting information. It's much, much tougher to figure out what to do with these millions of pieces of information that you collect. The second is electromobility. And this is how do we convert the machines from mechanical drives, transmissions to electrical drives, which are much more controllable, much more precise, and can easily be matched to the job site and are much more environmentally friendly. So that's part of the drive here as well, the sustainability drive. And the third one is automation. And this is, again, looking back at the driver, how do you take a small rural workforce and produce all the raw materials you need into finished products for the urban dwellers? So this is really an attempt to look after that. And those, even in the 9 months since we talked, those evolved a little bit. So we now no longer talk about just connectivity, we talk about digitization. So not only how do you get that information connected to your head office, but the form the information comes in and making sure we can use it and take advantage of it. And you also see that electromobility changed to now sustainable power, because it's not just electric or battery electric machines that we're talking about. It's all the different types of power we can use for the machines or use to get the work done. So what this leads us into is looking at more than just the battery electric machine. So I mentioned in the spring when I was talking to you that battery electric machines are good for the smaller machines or vehicles that are using relatively low power draws. So when you're talking under 20 kilowatts of power, kilowatt hours of power, you could pretty well do it with a battery and it's fairly efficient. But the minute you step above that into bigger machines or trucks trying to go long haul distances, electricity actually is not very efficient a source. So the electricity itself is extremely efficient, but the problem is that the batteries you need to transport that electricity to put it mobile are extremely heavy. And of course, even when discharged, you're still carrying all that weight. So you have a lot of extra work to do to carry the weight of the batteries without getting the energy output out of them. So batteries are only part of the solution. So we're also looking at other things like hybrid machines or mild hybrids, we call them. We're looking at alternative fuels. And, I often get asked when I'm doing these talks about new technology, why don't we just switch to an environmentally friendly and alternate fuel? And the reason is very simple. The diesel fuel is still by far the most efficient fuel source we've ever found. So if you look at diesel as 100% an index, the minute you go to biodiesels, which is all the blends or renewable diesels, which we have now, synthetic diesels, you drop your efficiency by about 10%. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but what that means in a machine design is your fuel tank has to get 10% bigger and you carry around 10% more liquid all the time to try to get that same production out of your machine. If you look at gasoline, you drop by about 13%. If you look at propane, you drop by about 35%. Plus, you have to put a tank and a pressure vessel on your machine, which in some of the environments we work in, it's not exactly a good thing to have a pressure vessel of a flammable liquid on your machine. And then you get liquid natural gas, about 40%, ethanol, which we put in gasolines all over to get better emission in your car. Ethanol by itself drops about 45% in efficiency. Compressed hydrogen, you drop about 75%. So really, and I've got hydrogen fueled machines, but hydrogen fueled as a combustion source is not very good. But when you get to using it in a fuel cell, converting hydrogen directly to electricity, then it has a lot of promise, because no longer are you having to carry batteries around. You have a compressed tank of hydrogen, you run it through a fuel cell, and you produce water, electricity, and heat. So that's a very efficient way to go. And that's a technology that has a lot of promise, especially because now you can start to power the high power applications using hydrogen fuel cells. And then finally, if you look at electricity, just on that same scale of comparing to diesel, electricity is about 5% as efficient as diesel. And the reason I just mentioned is because you have all the weight of the batteries that you have to carry around all the time versus the weight of a diesel fuel tank or a gallon of diesel. So that's why we're so intent on looking at all these different sustainable power paths to make sure we get something that's workable. So as an update to what we talked about last year, so if you look at the EMOB launches, we did go ahead with the 2 EMOB launches at ConExpo a month after we talked in February. ConExpo actually was interrupted for us. We didn't attend because of COVID, so we had a stand and we had virtual stand. So we broadcast the stand over the internet, and people could see the machines we have and get walkarounds and things like that, but we weren't actually at ConExpo. And what we did is go on an aggressive marketing
Here's to all
campaign
of
to
you,
take the place of
the
ConExpo
operators, the
instead.
builders, the problem solvers. We celebrate all of you for tirelessly exploring new, exciting projects and for helping us build the world we want to live in. You're the reason we continuously bring new innovations to market. You're the reason we present our most precious feature yet.
Okay, so I'll stop the video there for the sake of time, but you can see, and what I wanted to point out was that the marketing of this, we're not selling an alternate to the diesel equipment. We're selling a piece of equipment that has totally different features and goes into different applications. So with a conventional diesel, you can't use it for food processing inside, indoors. You know, it's noisy. You don't have the same aesthetic feel to it. So that's really the benefit of these electrics. It opens up a new market. And that's one of the things, the characteristics of innovation that we're excited about, is because innovation does that. It opens up new markets, new applications, new opportunities. So our marketing is built around that. It's not to replace or do better than a diesel, what a diesel does. It's to go into whole new areas with equipment that we could not do before. So in the last few minutes of my presentation, I just wanted to throw out some things and talk a little bit about leadership and management and where I see the future going in these. And this is meant to be my opinion. This is not, I'm not stating any facts here. This is my opinions, my thoughts on it, and it's meant to get you guys thinking about some of these different aspects. So if you look at management, one of the traditional definitions of management is the organization and coordination of activities of a business in order to define achieved objectives. This is very different than leadership. And I like Dwight Eisenhower's definition of leadership. It's the art of getting somebody else to do something you want done because he or she wants to do it. So it's motivating people to do something that you want done, but because they want to do it. So you're not telling them to do it, you're creating a motivation in them to do it. And the big point here is that management is a science. It is control of resources, control of money, scheduling, planning, all those types of things. Very important in running a business, but very different than leadership, which is an art of putting out a vision, of communicating to your people, of motivating your people. And to be successful, we need to do both, but they're very much changing in our new environment. And the change is coming about because of another driver. So adding to the drivers I talked about last time, there's a new driver popping up, which is the whole social organization dimension. And what I mean by that is how we are organized and dealing with each other is changing as we speak, and has been changing basically for the last 30 years. What we've done is gone from a hierarchical power structure, communication structure, authority structure into a network structure. And one of the big drivers of this is the technology has evolved. The technology, if you look at it, the internet is built around a network structure. And the younger generations that are coming up that have grown up in this network structure understand and are very comfortable with that, and not so comfortable with a hierarchical structure, which some of us older people have grown up in. So you've very much a generational shift here in what's happening and how you view the world. And that's what this is. So if you look at and compare the two, so a hierarchical is the traditional societal organizational structure. So whether it's a family unit where you have the father and mother at the top of the hierarchy and the children all the way down, or whether it's a company, or whether it's a department or a sports team or whatever you want, generally it's a hierarchical network. And what we've seen is that that's changing to a networked situation now, a network organization, which is very, very different than the traditional hierarchical. The hierarchical has a clear defined authority and roles. So if you look at a hierarchical corporate structure, the CEO at the top, everybody knows what his job is, everybody knows what his role is and his title is. It's CEO, it's president, whatever, and you know he's the leader of that organization. In a network, you don't have that. In most of the networks that we deal with, or a lot of them, the people are essentially autonomous. You don't know their title. You don't know, half the time, you don't know their name, their real name. They have an alias or a avatar or whatever you want to call it. And that's how they interact within this network. And basically, one of the characteristics of a network is that everybody is equal. And that therefore the power structure within it, who has influence, can come from anywhere. And it can change all the time. So it's very much, you're not looking to one person to guide and lead you. In a network, it can change over time. It can be a group of people. You may not even actually recognize who is leading that network in a particular direction. An example of a hierarchical is a military or a corporate structure, as we talked about. An example of the network is the internet. And the important thing is a hierarchy provides stability, predictability, and clarity. So the people that value stability, where their inherent need is to have a stable organization, tell me what I need to do, and I can go do it. What is my authority? What is my responsibility? Tend to like the hierarchical organization, whereas a network, it values freedom above all else. So it's not so the people that gravitate towards network are looking for that freedom. Don't tell me what to do. I don't want you micromanaging me. I want to be free to do whatever I need to do within the confines of the network. Neither one is good or bad. That's an important point here. They are different. And we have to understand as leaders and managers what the differences are and why those differences are so pronounced and how it's changing. And the best way or the best view of that I know of is from Peter Senge. He's an MIT Sloan business professor, but he's a systems guy. He basically looks at how systems interact. And what he said is the network, the organizational structure, really become our worldview. So if you've grown up in a hierarchical organizational structure, that is the way you're going to view the world. That is the way you're going to interpret what you see in the world. And if you've grown up in a networked organization or a networked society, you're going to tend to see the world from that perspective. And we're seeing that play out in real time. So what we need to do as leaders and managers is figure out a way to communicate these differences and to recognize that the worldview is actually different. So it's not a matter of convincing somebody to view the world as you do. You have to recognize that they may view it completely differently. So what is important to them to make them act the way you want them to act, to motivate them to act the way you want them to act within their worldview? And to do that, I go back to Aristotle's modes of persuasion, where basically what he said is there's three ways to appeal to people. There's the ethos, the pathos, and the logos. Logos is very simple. It's the logical argument. So it's the stating the facts and convincing people because the facts lead you to here. Pathos, the root word in English for that is empathy or pathetic. And that's basically an emotional appeal. So how do you appeal to the emotions of the person and motivate them in that way? And ethos comes back to the authority or the morality. And again, all three of those are present in all of us. All three of those are present depending on your worldview. But you have to adjust as leaders. If you want to communicate your vision and motivate your people, you have to adjust how you use these different modes of persuasion. As an example, if you look at ethos, I go back to the John Kennedy speech about reaching out and achieving space flight within the decade, where he gave at Texas A&M, he gave a famous speech that motivated the US basically to aim for the moon by the end of the decade and land a man on the moon, which they did. But that was very much an authority, morality type play to get people to follow behind him. Pathos argument or pathos example, you look at the Martin Luther King speech. I Have a Dream speech that very much appealed to the equality of people, to the morality to be treat everyone equally, but went beyond that and said, for the sake of our children, for the sake of our future, we've got to do this. Very much an appeal to the emotions, to the suffering, to the experience going forward. And then logos arguments, you look at any courtroom or any scientific paper will generally rely on logos arguments. So again, to kind of wrap it up, leadership is an art. It's how you influence people, how you make them do what they need to do or what they want to do to achieve your vision. Management is an organizational science. So two very different concepts. Some leaders can be good managers. Some managers can be good leaders, but they are not an absolute interchangeable. We are moving from hierarchical to network societal organizations. So that gradually changes the culture towards a whole different worldview. So what you value as a culture in networked organizations is very, very different than what we valued in a hierarchical a few years ago. Your individual worldview, of course, becomes your reality. So you can't separate the two. The fringe elements in a networked world obviously have a louder voice because you don't identify them as fringe. So the the loudest voice in the internet often gets the most coverage just because it's the loudest voice. And then again, what's important is both worldviews will continue to exist. So it's not like we're going to shift over 100% to one or the other, or that this is an absolute break and we stop the hierarchical and go network. Both will continue to exist. And then my final point was communication. Basically, to be effective, we need to understand the two worldviews and communicate to both worldviews all the time because our people are listening from different worldviews. So with that, I'll wrap it up. And I think we got a few minutes left or.
Thank you. Sorry, my mouse stopped working. Excellent presentation, Ray. That was fantastic. Let's see if we have, I know we had a few questions. I think the one was answered. Let me ask it anyway. I think we've already answered it. As the world shifts further towards working remote, what leadership styles or techniques would you recommend to adapt to this change? So I think you really covered the two different styles, but do you have anything further on that, or?
Yeah, I think as I said, it's a network change. To me, the key is not so much leadership styles, recognizing what the needs and demands of the different worldviews are, and then communicating successfully to those needs and demands. So good leaders have to be able to use all three modes of persuasion because the people listening are going to be coming from different worldviews.
Excellent. And then the other question we had was 10 years ago, the commentary was all about globalization and how we are moving towards being global citizens and a global economy. We are now seeing both the positive and negative impacts of this shift, which has people debating the wisdom of global centralization and versus regionalization. So 10 years from now, what positive and negative impacts do you anticipate as a result of increased digitization and automation?
This is a great question and really puts me on the spot. So thank you for that. I think everything, if you look at it, everything has its pros and cons. I think we tend to try to isolate things and view things as a pendulum. So everything's going to switch to network view or everything's going to be hierarchical or whatever, because that's comfortable, that's easy for us. The reality is most things, 99% of things end up in the middle. It's a balance of both, and 99% of things have pros and have cons. So it's not as simple as saying where are we going to be in 10 years. I think it's going to change. I think there's an exciting aspect to it that network organization, it does drive freedom, it does drive individual expression, it does take advantage of the talents of individual people, not only the people with authority and power, but it is very hard to control. It is very hard to harness and get everybody working in the same direction if you given them freedom. So I think that's going to be the challenge going forward. And I think what it's going to look like is you're going to see away from, we went to global organizations, but they were essentially hierarchical. I think you will see that shift from global organizations that are hierarchical to global organization that are networked. And within that network, each of your departments or countries or regions, whatever you want to call them, will become more autonomous. So you see, if you follow US politics, you saw that Trump featured heavily on nationalism, on what US has to do for itself. I think, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your worldview, I think that's going to be the way of the future. So there's going to be more cooperation, more communication with our peers in other countries, with globally, but there's going to be more focus on local and what we can do on a local basis and optimizing on the local sense, which is again a characteristic of the network organization, that you can optimize that. And if you look at technology, what that technology brings to that is the ability to optimize locally. Because one of the problems with the global structure when we went to it is we realized that global organizations are so complex that nobody can manage them properly. They're just too complex. You have too many tax regimens. You have too many government regulations. So there's nobody in the world smart enough to run a global organization and really optimize it in all regions. With network organizations, we start being able to do that and start having technologies that can optimize on the local level and then add up to a global result. That was a long-winded answer but that was a really good question, a really thought-provoking question. So thank you.
Definitely. Is there any other questions before we wrap up here? Do you mind stop sharing your screen there, Ray, and I'll switch over. I've got one last slide to put up there.
Certainly.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ray. We really appreciated that. Move this over here. Any questions still, or we're good? Oh, Aaron Bessling. Let me unmute you. Hold on.
Thanks very much, Ray. That was fabulous. So just one quick question. You mentioned that the battery units that you guys are outputting there with a 5% efficiency of diesel. I was surprised to hear that. So now when you compare that to something, I know in your last presentation you talked about units being directly wired into the grid. What's the efficiency difference there between diesel and straight powered without the batteries?
Oh, sorry, Ray, you're still muted. Hold on, Ray. You gotta unmute it there. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, the great question, because that I probably didn't make that clear. So electricity itself is extremely efficient, and we can convert it to work extremely efficiently. So if you take electricity itself, it's actually more efficient than diesel. The problem with electricity, it's not portable. Okay, so it's when you get the batteries and the weight of the batteries, which at this point in our technology are mainly metal, and metal is heavy. So you're taking around the weight of the batteries and a tremendous weight for very little energy output relative to diesel. Okay, so that's where the power density equation comes in and the 5% I was talking about. Now, if you wire a machine to the grid, then you get electricity directly in, you don't have the weight of the batteries, then you are actually more efficient than diesel because you don't even have the weight of diesel fuel. But we're limited as to how many machines we can wire directly in. So that's where hydrogen fuel cells, that's where these other technologies start to come into play.
Nice. And
But
do you see any,
great question.
Yeah. Do you see any more technology changes as far as battery, like from lithium ion, what the next kind of step up is there, or have there been many developments from your aspect, or?
There's a lot of, with batteries, we're into a lot of incremental innovation. So they're getting better and better and better. As fast as we can build them into machines, we get batteries that have twice the storage capacity for the same density. So that's very exciting. There are a couple of technologies that are step technologies or disruptive technologies in batteries, but at the moment they're still extremely expensive and they deal with some rather exotic chemistry. So they're a little ways out, but there are things we can do. Like I said, to me, the most promising technology is the fuel cell technology, where you can convert directly into electricity when you need it, and therefore you don't have to have a storage, which is our problem with electricity. It's how do you store it so when you have it when you need it.
Interesting. Thank you.
Perfect. Any more questions before we wrap up here? I don't see any hands up, so we want to thank both Aaron and Ray again for coming back. You guys were both excellent speakers and very timely topics. Also, a special thanks to Ben Waldron from Strong Co for helping us again for a second time organizing this. We really appreciate your help, Ben. I want to thank our sponsors again. With their ongoing support, as I said, it helps us and keeps things moving along really well.